It's asking 6 very simple questions to help us understand a bit more about who is with us today and why you're here. So scroll down and you'll see all the questions. It should only take a few seconds to answer those questions, but it's great to get to know a bit more about you, who we have here today, who we have involved with us from across the world. So when you get a chance, take part in the polls and look out for them flicking up every now and again. But as I said, the event is about you, the officials that keep sport moving, and the people behind our officials. So the first presentations today come from the ONSIDE project. We have 4 speakers providing insight to the first ever EU-funded project dedicated to sport officiating. First up, we have Ben Gittis and Julia Lee. Ben is the Director of Standards at EOSE and has been with the European Observatoire for 8 years. He specialised in the area of skills and workforce development in sport for nearly 20 years. So Ben knows plenty about what we're talking about today. Based in Scotland, before COVID, Ben travelled extensively across Europe as part of EU projects with EOSE members and partners, and he is the ONSIDE project manager. Julia Lee was the first female qualified rugby league referee in GB and Australia and has 15 years experience as a match official, achieving professional and international honours. Julia is chair of the International Rugby League Women's Advisory Group. She's founder and director of the Common Sense Initiative and a director of Sports Officials UK. So without any further ado, let's hand over to Ben to get us cracking today.
Thank you, David. Next slide, please. I want to start by introducing EOSE, which is the European Observatoire of Sport and Employment and the applicant and coordinator of the ONSIDE project. Next slide, please. EOSE is a not-for-profit organisation based in France with a focus on education and skills development. We work with partners across the sports sector to make sure the sport workforce of paid staff and volunteers have the skills and competence to succeed and meet the needs of the labour market. We have been delighted to work with partners in sport officiating in this project. Next slide, please. ONSIDE is a project funded by the European Union under Erasmus, which is the EU programme for education, training, youth and sport. The sport chapter of the Erasmus programme aims to support European partnerships on grassroots sport to pursue a number of objectives, including good governance, voluntary activities, social inclusion, equal opportunities, and promoting education and in and through sport with a focus on skills development. Next slide, please. The full title of the ONSIDE project is Innovative Education to Enhance the Skills of Sport Officials in Europe. It is a 3-year project with a focus on the EU priority of promoting education skills development in sport. We're nearly at the end of the project and finishes next month at the end of December. There are 11 partners from 9 countries in the missions, which is European Handball Federation, European Athletics, and European Table Tennis Union, 2 national sport federations, Romanian Football Federation and British Wheelchair Basketball, 1 national sports council, which is Sport Malta, 1 national Olympic committee from the Netherlands, a university, the National Sports Academy Vasilevsky from Bulgaria, and 2 national associations of sport officials, AFCAM from France, and our partners in the application, Sports Officials from the UK. Next slide, please. The methodology used in the project has been the 7-step model for lifelong learning in sport, which is a recognised strategy for developing the sports sector and for developing sport education linked to the labour market. The first 5 steps of the model relate to the industry, finding out about the realities and challenges in industry, particularly about workforce and about people, and defining the competences needed to perform. Whereas step 6 is more about education and developing training courses and qualifications to match the needs of the industry. Next slide, please. The 3 main areas of work in ONSIDE project have been research to understand the realities and challenges in the sector, particularly about people, around the people, standards to define the competences needed to perform, and education to upskill the workforce. Before looking at these in more detail, I'd like to hand over to Julia to discuss the need for the project from the sector. Over to you, Julia.
Thank you. Thanks, Ben. Next slide. Good morning, everyone. I just must say first and go off script, which I know I shouldn't do. It's just so brilliant to see so many people with an interest in sports officials joining the webinar. Welcome, everyone. And so from such a range of sports and governing bodies and different things. So very, very welcome. My bit about this really is around sports officials and why we needed to do this particular project. And one was around the recruitment and retention of officials at all levels of sport. We all know that, and it's common in all sports, that recruiting and retaining officials is a tough job. And something that we really need to do is begin to look at, one, how we recruit, but also how we manage to retain them. The other things around it, and I know as an ex-sports official myself, there was nothing for me to develop as a sports official when I was coming through. So this is a real passion, and this project was a real passion around giving sports officials the generic skills and competencies, because there's so many generic things across the sports field to be able to upgrade your skills and competencies, and then being able to deal with the ever challenging environment, which is evolving, as we know, within the sports officials world. And another really big one for us all was around the visibility and recognition. So often in sports, the sports officials sit outside the sport or part of the sport, and they're often thought of last on the pecking order, really. So this project was about increasing the visibility and the recognition of sports officials. Next slide, please. The other point was around actually having some reliable and valid research. I don't know if anyone out there has looked for anything on sports officials research-wise, and there was nothing particularly that we could find that was specific for sports officials in Europe. We found some more internationally, but it was about having all that research to underpin what we were going to do, and then also for others to use. So if people are really interested in the reams of research that we've actually collected, please give us a shout, because there's some great information that you can use for being able to build a case for sports officials, and particularly the education of sports officials. Also around the generic skills and competencies, the important thing about this was actually putting it to the European occupational standards. So everything that we've developed as part of the e-learning, which Janie will talk later around, is mapped across. So the importance of this was so that you can use it in your environments when you want to use it. So it's skills for life, should I say, but also it gives it credibility and consistency throughout the sports official world, which was something that was needed when we began to dig deeper within the research. The other thing is it then gives us even more, creating more training pathways, and to recognise being able to formal pathways, but also being able to give the pathways to sports officials on a more consistent basis from sport to sport, but also within each formal qualification as well, which was really exciting. Thank you. Next slide. And the last slide for me around the real need to promote education through sports officiating. There was some things out there. There was some great education and great practice that we're actually doing. And this creating a new training pathway was really important for us, again, for this consistency of opportunities, so that you can actually find the progress and begin as a sports official to really begin to build with that. And then also, as many of you will know, sports officiating is in the voluntary sector and very active in the voluntary sector. And we needed to make sure that it enhanced equality and opportunity and social inclusion and accessibility for all within the sports official sector, which it's more than just being a sports official. There's so much more around what we actually do. And actually, this was the first time, and Ben's mentioned the amount of partners that we brought, so many stakeholders at all the different levels, right from NGB right up to Olympic, to be able to have a uniform approach for sports officiating across Europe. And all I can say is it's a brilliant project, a really exciting project. And if people are interested in looking in more detail, which Ben's going to discuss, it's there to be shared. Thank you, Ben. Over to you.
Thanks, Julia. I'm going to talk briefly about the research phase of the project before the next speakers present the standards and education. The research had three parts: desk research, where we, as Julia said, we looked very widely into existing standards, education courses, and academic and industry papers from Europe and all around the world, particularly any papers or information about the workforce, recruitment, retention, and training standards for sports officials across all sports. We also did interviews, Julia and myself, we interviewed people from responsible for developing officials from European and international sport federations, and got lots of great insights into the development of sport officials from the European and international federations. And finally, we did an online survey, which is translated into several languages, a survey of national sport federations, and we had about 250 responses, where again, we had some great insights on recruitment, retention, and some of the competences, skills, and attributes of sport officials. Next slide. The results will be published in the papers released at the end of the project, but some headline results and conclusions where there is not good recognition and respect for sport officials among the public. That was the perception of many of the federations and people we spoke to. The demands and expectations on sport officials are increasing from federations, leagues, and even the public. There's not a good gender balance, but there is a good commitment in feeling that this should be looked at and addressed. Some officials do not believe officiating is a priority in their own federation. So that was an interesting result from the research. And also there's a lot of data around it's not easy to attract and recruit officials. So recruitment and retention was something we gathered a lot of information about, while also being able to gather feedback on the competences, generic skills and attributes for sport officials across all different sports to inform our results. And fortunately, there was also very good support for generic standards and developing e-learning for sport officials to cover those generic skills common to all sports. Next slide, please. There is an ONSIDE website at www.onside-sport.eu, and although the project's not quite finished, this is where we will publish all of the project outputs, including the occupational map, which for sport officiating in Europe, which will contain the research results, as well as the standards and other outputs you'll be hearing about. Next slide, please. Finally, I would like to thank the partners again, who I listed earlier, and you can see on the screen, as Julia said, it's been a very nice experience to work across different sports and across different countries and across different types of organizations to really study and develop sport officiating in Europe. And I'd like to thank the partners for their hard work and commitment. Next slide, please. You are welcome to contact us through the website or the email address. You'll see this slide several times throughout the morning. Next slide, please. And now I'd like to hand back to David.
Yes, there we are. I knew I could find myself somewhere there. That's great, Ben and Julia. Thank you very much for that, a bit of insight there to the work that's gone on. I'd like to ask the both of you a question about the work that you've done, and really the fact that we know that this is the first time this ONSIDE project's been done. We know that you're really managing to step up the support for officials. What do you both think has been the most innovative element, do you think, of the ONSIDE initiative? Ben, we'll go with you first.
Yeah, I think it's what I mentioned, bringing all the different sports and different types of organizations, from universities to sports councils to Olympic Committee to the national and European sport federations together. Maybe it is happening elsewhere, but a lot of people reported that it was the first time, and so to discuss officiating from all those different perspectives, we think was quite innovative. Would you agree, Julia?
Without a doubt. And I think the most innovative bit is the generic skills of a sports official. So the fact that they're so drawing out all those commonalities, which actually as sports officials, we know they happen, but often we don't talk across sports because we're so busy officiating. We're so busy doing our own sports that we don't think about, well, how can we work? I know quite often I've spoke to Janie about if only we knew each other as women within her football world and within my rugby league world, we would have shared so many things and similarities. So this has been a great opportunity to be able to get those generic skills, understand what they are, and also formalize them across Europe so that people can actually use them for how they want to use them in their sport, which again is the innovative thing. It's there for other people to take as a legacy. It's a fantastic legacy to be able to leave, not just what we've developed from the learning platform, but also from the fact that these generic skills can be used across sports, which I just think is just phenomenal.
Yeah, I agree with you, Julia. I think it's fantastic, and it's great to see the number of people that are commenting in the chat box today about being part of this and experiencing it, and certainly a lot of positivity there about that ability to come together. I think that's something that sometimes we underestimate the value of bringing people together from different countries to learn. Great, and we've been taking part in the poll as well, so it's great to see everybody having getting the polls up and running, ticking. We'll have more to come, but it's good to see we've got a real split of people that we have today across the age ranges, which is fantastic. Ben will be delighted to see that. He's worked hard on making sure we have people well represented across the world. And it's great to see we've got 84% of those taking part today have been a sport official or are a sport official, and that's great. Obviously there are some people we're much wider with the project in terms of getting to people who are administrators who support that, but it's great to see so many actual officials involved today as well. So thank you very much to Ben and Julia. Now we're going to hear a bit more about what the ONSIDE standards mean for you. Jeff Carroll, the Skills Development Manager for EOSE, has 30 years of experience of developing standards and qualifications in many different sectors, including sport and physical activity. Jeff's developed vocational education systems across the European Union, the Middle East, Indian subcontinent and Africa, and has worked with the ONSIDE partners to develop the first European occupational standards for sport officiating. So Jeff, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you so much, David. And can I say it's such a great pleasure and an honor to speak today on this really important subject to so many people from so many different countries and so many important organizations. So the purpose of my presentation today is to speak to you about the standards that we have developed as part of the ONSIDE project, to give you some examples and also to give you a better understanding about how these standards could be used in all of your different organizations. So if we could move on to the next slide, please. Let me first of all say a few words about the occupational professional standards and why they are important. Ben, in his introduction, I think when he was talking about the methodology that we've used, gave a very clear message that it is the view of EOSE and all our partner organizations that training and education must be led by the needs of the job. So we need to be very clear about what it is that sports officials need to be able to do and the standards they should be able to achieve when we do that. And EOSE, in the course of nearly 20 years of work, has refined a very clear methodology in order to do this. And the methodology we use is to identify the competencies that sports officials need, first of all, and then to define standards so that we can judge whether or not people really have those competencies. So let me say a few words about the occupational standards first of all. The occupational standards that have been developed are statements of the skills, knowledge, understanding, and values needed for effective performance in a job role. And in this case, we're talking about sports officials. They are expressed as outcomes of competent performance. In other words, what is it that we want the sports official to be able to achieve when they are carrying out their roles and responsibilities? The third really important point is the standards must define good practice in a profession. So when we express the standards, we're not seeking to just describe average or basic performance. We're actually trying to identify performance that represents good practice. And clearly that's one of the reasons why we've involved so many partners and so many important organizations in this project, because they are the ones who know what competent performance is. Professional standards should be the benchmark of competence required by the sector. And if we consider the whole sector of sport and then the subsector of sport officiating, it is for those sectors and that subsector to define the benchmarks of competence. And that's what we tried to do in this project. The next point is another really important thing, and that is that when we develop standards, they become public documents. And as public documents, they can be of immense value to individuals, the people who do the job, to employers, to international federations, national federations, etc., and education and training providers. And of course, that is very important, and we'll hear more about that later when Jamie Frampton will be talking about the educational products that have come out of this project. And then finally, and I'm going to say a few more words about this, standards are developed through a systematic process of analysis, stakeholder consultation, and then revision. And Julia, in her introductory remarks, made reference to all of the different organizations that have been involved in this. They have been our stakeholders. We have consistently consulted with them throughout the project, taken account of their feedback, and amended the standards as we've been going along. Next slide, please. Now, let's think first of all about the benefits of having occupational standards. And we've broken this down into two parts. First of all, let's think about the individual. And in this case, we're talking about the sports official. So individuals can use standards to develop their self-confidence. If they know what standard they're supposed to be performing against, and if they can hit that standard, it gives them a much stronger sense that they are performing their job correctly. And therefore, it can build their personal effectiveness. Secondly, it provides a means for identifying or determining the gaps in knowledge, experience, and skills. So if we take a sports official, and if that sports official evaluates their own performance against the standards, and they think about what it is they're supposed to be doing, that then puts them in a position where they begin to see why it is that they are not achieving the standards. And therefore they can see, where are the gaps? What do I not know? What experience have I not yet had? What skills have I not yet acquired in order to get to where I want to be in terms of doing the job to the standard? They offer an objective process for identifying training needs. They ensure best practice, because these standards must be based on an understanding of what is good practice in being a sports official. And then finally, they support their professional development. Now let's move on now and think about what are the benefits for organizations. Next slide, please. So from the point of view of an organization, from a federation, for example, they can use these standards now to identify and plan personnel requirements. If they know what it is that people need to be able to do, it gives them a much clearer understanding about how to recruit and how to employ people. Therefore, it puts them in a position where they can design and implement recruitment and selection processes more accurately, more objectively. The standards then provide a basis to develop job descriptions and person specifications for staff and for volunteers in the sector. It puts them in a much stronger position to design, deliver, and evaluate training programs in order to build the competence of the officials that they employ. We then have common standards of performance and quality here becomes a very important issue, because quality of the organization can be delivered through the quality of the staff that they employ, who are meeting the standards, the standards for the profession. They can demonstrate the competence of the organization, for example, when they're applying for funding or tendering for projects, because they can say all of the staff that we employ meet the appropriate occupational standards. And then finally, they can plan appropriate professional development. Next slide, please. Now, I want to say a few words about how we have been through this process of developing the standards. The methodology that we use is something called functional analysis. And functional analysis is very straightforward. It's a method of analyzing a sector or an occupation, in this case, sports official, to develop a model of competency and good practice. It's based on the concept of role expectation. In other words, we say, what is it that the employers expect their officials to be able to do? What functions should they carry out? What standards should they meet? And that is emphasized on the final bullet point, that we're not simply looking at what people do, we're looking at about what competent people are expected to do. What are they supposed to do as far as their job is concerned? Next slide, please. The functional analysis process, and all of the partners in the project were involved in this. They all participated, they all fed into it. And of course, all of this was tested through much wider consultation across the European Union. First of all, we begin by saying, what is the key purpose? What is the overall goal? What is the overall aim of the sports official? And then we begin to break that down into further levels of detail. So we say, okay, if that's the key role, if that's the key purpose, the goal of the job, then what are the main things that they have to do in order to achieve that key purpose? And then we take each one of those key roles and we break it down into functions. And these are the real can-do statements. These are the things that we expect on a day-to-day basis the sports official to be able to do when they're operating in their role. And then we need to ask the question, okay, now we know what it is that they're expected to do. How do we know, first of all, whether or not they are doing that to the appropriate standard? And then secondly, what areas of knowledge and understanding do they need in order to perform that role consistently over time? And we went through a process of developing all of those things for the sports official. Then we went through a process of employer validation. We had a very wide-ranging consultation, analysis of the feedback, etc. And then we updated the standards accordingly. And that will then, and Janie later on is going to be giving you much more detail about that. That will then lead us into the educational and training products. Because I said right at the beginning of the presentation, our philosophy is based on the concept that education and training must follow the needs of the occupation, the needs of the profession. Next slide, please. Now, what I'm going to do for you now is to show you the functional analysis that we carried out as far as sports officials were concerned. And as Julia said in her introductory remarks, we need to take account of the fact that we have looked at sports officiating as a generic role. So we know there are hundreds of sports in which officials play a very important role. We couldn't go through the process of developing standards for each one of those hundreds of sports. And therefore, what we chose to do, very sensibly, I think, was to look at the generic role of the sports official. We began, first of all, by identifying the key purpose. So this was supposed to be the goal, the main aim of the sports official. And after a long period of discussion, debate, etc., we came up with that very simple statement. It is to enable participants, the athletes, the competitors, to compete within the spirit of the sport through the impartial application of the rules, laws, and ethics of the sport. So we said, after all this discussion, in that simple, concise statement, that is what we think the sports official should be aiming to do. And we then went through that process of further analysis, and we came up with 4 major key roles. The first one was around evaluating, developing their own performance as a sports official. The second one was about effective relationships. The next one was the thing that most of us see when we see sports officials doing their job, and that's the big one, which is manage competition within the rules, laws, and ethics of the sport. And then finally, we have key role D, which is about managing information as required by the officiating role. And then you can see that each one of those key roles has been broken down into these functions. So if you look at key role C, the official needs to be able to ensure the competition environment meets the rules, laws, and ethics. They have to apply a duty of care for competitors and officials. They have to monitor competition and apply the rules, laws, and ethics of the sport. If they are operating in some sort of judge or jury sport, they need to be able to monitor the competition and judge the quality of performance. And then in in function C5, they need to be able to manage conflict as part of the sports official's role. Next slide, please. 2 other things important to talk about. We need to be able to identify whether or not the official meets the standard. And in order to do that, we use performance criteria. Next slide, please. So here's an example, and we've only shown you 4 of the performance criteria for function C3. This is about monitoring the competition and applying the rules, laws, and ethics. Here are 4 examples of what the sports official needs to be able to do. They need to be able to ensure their own physical and psychological condition meets the requirements. They need to access and interpret information about the competition, competitors, rules, etc. They need to make sure they've got all the personal equipment ready, and they need to maintain focus and concentration throughout the competition. We've only shown you 4 examples there. There are about 9 or 10 altogether for that particular function. Next slide, please. And then finally, we need to think about the knowledge and understanding that they need. And this is where we lead into the educational products that, that Janie will be telling us about later on today. But here again are 4 examples. Obviously, the sports official needs to know about the rules, laws, and ethics. They need to know the sports standards for the official's physical and psychological condition. They need to know what kind of activities they should be carrying out in order to maintain their own physical and psychological condition. And they need to be able to anticipate types of issues or problems that may occur. So again, there are some examples of knowledge and understanding which will lead into the education and training. And then last slide, please. So there we have the contact details that Ben has reminded you about. These things will be available to all of you so that people can share the products of what we have done as far as this is concerned. And I would encourage you very strongly to study the standards in detail, because clearly I've only been able to give you a very brief taste of what it is that we've done. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Jeff. That's excellent. We're getting lots of questions coming in, and I see lots of questions coming into the Q&A box at the bottom, which is great. Thank you, everybody, for those questions, and in the chat box too. So we wanted people to be involved. We wanted you to get involved today and ask questions. So remember, there's never a stupid question. We're always looking for things for your feedback. So if anybody's got any questions for Jeff, let's or Janie, who you'll hear shortly, then let's put them in there and we'll get them answered. Jeff, I mean, I've got one question for you in terms of the standards. Can you tell us a little bit more about how the standards can be used and by whom in terms of informing the training programs and learning outcomes that lots of these people that are involved today will have?
I think there are probably 2 things that we identified throughout the project. I mean, the first thing is the benefit for the individual, I think. And we must take account of the fact that we want sports officials to take responsibility for their own development. We need them to think about constantly evaluating their performance, thinking about how well they are performing, thinking about where the gaps are, being able to work closely with their assessors in order to identify what it is they should be doing, and therefore what kind of training needs and further development needs, lifelong learning needs might they have, in order not just to perform to the standard that they need to be able to do at that time, but also to think about their progression to higher levels as officials. And then the second thing, and I think this is what's going to come from Janie's presentation, is how can we take that raw material that we developed in the standards and how can we transform that into generic training programs for officials that then help them to achieve those standards consistently every time they go out to officiate a game, a competition of any kind. Thank you, David.
Great, Jeff. Consistent standards. That's what we're all looking for, isn't it?
Exactly.
Consistency. Okay, Jeff, thank you very much for that very enlightening presentation there. Next up, we have Janie Frampton. Janie has been an active football referee for 30 years and became only the second woman involved in men's professional football. She has 33 international caps. Janie, I'm told, is that right? 33 caps. Janie was one of 8 female FIFA instructors in the world and has been privileged to be involved in many FIFA World Cups. Janie is director of her own sports officials consultancy for sports officials, working all across sports in the education and development of officials. Janie is also honorary CEO of the Sports Officials UK organisation and vice president of the new International Federation for Sports Officials, IFSO. So without any further ado, Janie, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, David. And good morning, everyone. It's fabulous to see so many people joining us this morning who are clearly interested in the work we're doing. Firstly, I'd like to thank Ben, Jeff, and Julia for pretty much putting the foundation down of the work we've done and how that underpinned what I'm going to talk about now. It's really important that when we look at all this work, all this research, writing the functional map, writing the standards, what are we going to do with them? And it's really important, and Jeff touched on it earlier, that when anybody takes an accredited qualification, then there needs to be a value added to that. And we can now measure that competence of the sports official using the standards provided. And I noticed a couple of questions in the chat box. It doesn't have to be accredited qualification. If you're going to build any piece of training, you can actually use these standards to build that training. So we can use the standards to develop detailed content and material for training. And that's really important, be it accredited or non-accredited. And I don't want people to get hung up on the fact that it has to be accredited qualification. It is about measuring the competence. On this occasion, we've designed the training through e-learning courses, but all of the standards that we've created can be for face-to-face learning, post-COVID, of course. It can be for e-learning, it can be for creating webinar content. So you can actually change that content to suit yourself. Next slide, please. So the benefits of e-learning, I think we've all learned through these very difficult times, you know, the benefits of working remotely. And e-learning has always had that benefit. It's easy accessible to the masses. And that's the most important, because we appreciate so much these days where budgets are very tight. They're always very tight for sports officiating, but we've got to work smarter and make our funding go much further. So it's accessible to the masses, which makes it very cost effective. Logistically convenient. We also appreciate that geographically, to deliver training to our sports officials, it's not always that easy geographically to set up seminars or working groups. So to do it online through e-learning is so easy, because within the platform, we also have built in lots of blogs and forums for people to share and stay in touch constantly, as we are now. The content we've built online, it's all measurable, it's assessed. So therefore, you know with your sports officials, firstly, who's been online and has been showing a commitment to their own development, how long they've been online, what grades they're getting. And if an organisation wants to set a grade that they, for example, want a 75% pass, and the individual doesn't get that pass, then you can direct them to actually have another look, review the questions they get wrong, so that you can assess their knowledge, their learning, and their experience. And of course, by doing so, it's upskilling the officiating workforce. And that's really important, because listening to a lot of sports across a lot of years, they have all said that they barely have enough human resource and financial resource to actually keep their officials running and covering competitions. So to actually have the money and the resources to spend on upskilling them is very rare. They just don't have it. And this is where this will be an absolute bonus. Next slide, please. So our e-learning has to be structured in a way that is three-dimensional learning. So if you were in a classroom environment, you would have PowerPoint slides, you would have the interaction from the group, as well as all the information given by the tutor and activities along with it. And this way, we try and incorporate all of that into interactive and interesting learning for all demographics, because we always have to remember, as an educationalist, that people have different styles of learning, and we have to make sure that it's not just about talking to someone, it's not just about showing them a PowerPoint slide, it's about involving them in their own learning. So this is what we've tried to capture, and we will continue to do so as we continue this journey on e-learning platforms. Of course, this is time efficient, and that is really important, because we understand that there's a lot of call on people's downtime now, or social time. They have their families and work, and sometimes sport is not a professional option for them, so they have to look at what time they have available. So this you can dip in and dip out of. So you can pick up where you've left off, or you can start the module again. Either way, it's absolutely there to compound your learning, to make sure you understand what you're learning along that journey. The learner must go through all the content, as it is assessed-based, so they can't just skip it. So you have to actually read the pieces we want you to read, so that you create an understanding, and then questions are asked on that piece of learning. So it is important that learners know that if it's a 45-minute module, they can't skip through it in 5 minutes and think that they're going to come out with an achieved outcome and measurement of their competence, because that won't happen. So as I've said, all modules are assessed and given a percentage at the end, of which the administrator of each sport can then look at how they manage that particular sports official, where they're promoted, where they are on the merit table, etc. So next slide, please. So far, as part of the project, we created 6 quite big modules. They range from 45 minutes of actual learning to an hour and a quarter. So they are quite hefty, and we make no apology for that, because if the learning is going to be a big part of their development, then we have to make sure that it is quite robust in the content. So we've created what we felt as a group, because we went to all the partners on this and dissected it quite clearly, that we felt that the 6 key areas to start with, although there's so many more important areas out there. So we started with communication, conflict management, personal brand, teamwork, honesty, ethics and fair play, and observation and decision making. And we felt that to start with, they were very generic across the board and would be the most helpful for the sports officials that we worked with. Next slide, please. So also within the module framework, we created outlines of other courses. So we've sort of said what learning outcomes should be from each subject matter, how you can achieve that, what sort of content you would need to deliver, to give you an idea and some help, some real tools on how you can create your own learning. Now, we've done this around, again, some other areas that the group felt were important, around administration, personal development, sports integrity, physical and psychological development, risk assessment, duty of care, and technology. And let's be quite clear here, not all of those things will be relevant to all of the sports at all of the levels. So the idea is you actually pick out what is relevant to your sport and relevant to the officials that you want to train and develop. But But this gives you an idea. And what it also does, it means that you can look at this and how it's structured, and you can look at how you can then create your own modules in different subjects. Next slide, please. So the process is very easy. There will be quite a lot of work going on from here. So at the moment, the platform gives a URL for the online e-learning platform and login credentials. So that's what our partners have at the moment. A video is available to aid navigation of the e-learning platform itself. And then there's a process for accessibility to the platform for organizations. So at the moment, we have the platform set up for our partners, and it is set up for others to just see and access. But of course, there is a further part of development. If any organization wants to use it themselves, then going forward, our organization, IFSO, would be pleased to assist in how we manage that. Next slide, please. So this is just very basic. It shows just a few of the interfaces of how you log in. It's very, very simple. We've tried to keep it simple because we also appreciate not everybody has got a technological mind. I certainly don't. I know enough, and that's enough for me, but I know others may struggle. They may struggle to access to laptops, so we have to make sure that it's mobile friendly. So they come in and they see at the moment the 6 modules, and they can click on any one of those modules and start taking it and being assessed on it. And to the right of the face, you will see there's a whole list of things that can be done. So this is where you can join blogs and forums. We can add and take away different functions as to what each organization needs to use. And there also, administrators can see reports on their individual sports officials and how they're doing. We know that a lot of people now, given COVID, are looking at e-learning, and this is really important now that we look at how we can move this forward and get the best out of it and be very efficient as organizations. The more efficient we can be, the smarter we can work, the more development we can deliver to our sports officials, which of course raises then the whole experience for the participant and the athlete. Next slide, please. So finally, as part of this package of work, there will be a handbook of training modules for sports officials in Europe. So we will put all of this into a handbook and loads of other information around what types of tutors you would need to deliver face-to-face, and other handy tips on the actual methodology of training. So it'll be a guide to developing generic skills so that you can do your own courses, your own modules. You don't have to follow our template, but it's there for you if you need to, and how to link that to the standards. And most importantly, there will be a huge list of ideas of how you can use the standards. And when we did this project back in the UK, back in the early 2000s, for me, that was one of the most important things about the handbook. And that was showing people in 2 or 3 pages just how they could use it very efficiently. It's a guide to a very effective face-to-face delivery and how you teach and train people. And I know many of you out there are already trainers within your sport, but as we all know, it's always good to learn new ways, new tactics of doing things and sharing those ideas among the sector. And there'll be relevant assessment tools linked to the learning outcomes. So we've shown some assessment tools within the modules, but there are others that we can also share and help you along the way with through the ongoing program of IFSO. I do hope that's interesting to you. And on the next slide, again, there are the contact details.
That's great, Janie. Janie, that's you're taking us right through there. I was going to ask you myself, see for some of the questions that are coming in, but you know, there seems to be quite a lot more engagement with a lot of online, you know, routes into learning through COVID because of the problems with the lockdown. Have you found that? And do you think that the COVID lockdown will actually help with engagement in e-learning, whether that's across the world, across countries, or within people's own countries?
You know, David, it's a very valuable question. You know, we've been working with e-learning for some years now, But I think there was a few barriers. It was a cost was an issue for a lot of organisations. There was a lack of trust in maybe that could replace face-to-face learning, because we still believe face-to-face learning is very valuable and you have a blended learning approach. However, I think COVID has taught us that we can actually learn and develop in very, very many different ways. So since the first lockdown in April, I know that the e-learning development has gone through the roof in sports, in all sectors of the sport. And people are now engaging and buying into it because it is very cost effective. I think people are now seeing.
Yeah, and you expect that to continue then, Jeannie? You know, when everybody comes back and goes into their normal routines, which we hope will happen at some stage, do you think that will continue? They'll have learned from this?
I do think so. We do a lot of work with World Athletics, and World Athletics are really keen now to say, actually, you know, it can't replace face-to-face, but we actually need to use it more in conjunction and in collaboration with face-to-face delivery. So I think you pick and choose what is far more effective to deliver e-learning and what still needs to be done face-to-face. So for example, any practical training still needs to be done in a practical manner, and you can't do that through e-learning successfully. But I do think a lot of organizations are saying, right, now we can upskill our officials much more and more of them at a lesser cost, and that at the bottom line is what we all have to look at.
Excellent, Jenny. Yeah, I think there's no doubt about that. And so, you know, we're seeing some of the benefits perhaps of a very difficult year, that, you know, for sport, but for the world and everybody globally. But it's interesting to see some benefits come from that. That's great, Jenny. Thanks very much. I see John Driscoll has made a comment about being very enthusiastic about e-learning for athletics officials in the chat box, prompted by the current situation. We've converted much of our level 1 courses and they're working well, says John. Totally agree with the benefits shown on Janie's slides. So that's great. Thanks very much for these comments. Ben and Julia are very busy on the question and answers, answering your questions there. So it's great to see. We asked you to be involved. Thanks very much for doing that. And getting involved and asking questions. Now's the time to do that. So we've got a new poll as well we'll put up for you, because we want to get your feedback today on what you think of these courses, and we want you to be honest, because it doesn't help if we just are bland about it being not very good or great. Let's, you know, give us some honest questions back and honest answers back. We've got 3 questions there, and it helps the team in understanding how they develop the courses to come. So it's great to have that from Janie. Thank you again, Janie. Before we're just going to head into a short break, because we think it's very important that you stretch your legs, and it's really important that you get a little bit of exercise and away from the screen throughout the day. So before we do that, we're going to hear from one of the ONSIDE project ambassadors. Joy Johnson has officiated at 3 Olympic Games in ice hockey and worked in many officiating roles. So let's hear from online ambassador Joy Johnson.
My name is Joy Johnston and I'm referee chief for the Ice Hockey UK referee section, and I'm also an officiating performance coach for the International Ice Hockey Federation. I'm extremely proud to be an ambassador for the ONSIDE project. I've had a long career in officiating. It's really a passion of mine. I started when I was 12 years old, worked my way up through the English Ice Hockey Association and Ice Hockey UK, gained my international licence, and was lucky enough to be selected to officiate at 3 Olympics, Torino in 2006, Vancouver in 2010 and Sochi in 2014, after which I spent a couple of years in Abu Dhabi setting up their officiating programme for the ice sports there, and then moved back to the UK and took up my current role with Ice Hockey UK. The last year has been quite challenging from an officiating perspective, and has really taught us that we need to find different ways of training officials, being more practical, setting up e-learning opportunities, and really trying to make sure that we've got a blended approach to teaching officials the skills of officiating. I think what this programme does is set up some generic modules that organisations can pick up and bespoke and make their own, so that they match onto occupational standards and can be traced back to something which is really very strong in terms of creating a like system across all sports. I'm really proud to be an ambassador for the programme, and I think it will be really useful for lots of different sports to have a common ground to work from.
Thank you very much, Joy. You can see there are so many people that have been involved in the project, and it's great to hear from them. We're just going to go into a refreshment break. We're working on Paris-Brussels time today, so it's currently 10:58 a.m. Paris-Brussels time. Make a note of that time where you are around the world. We want you back, as the Jackson 5 famously said, in around 12 minutes. So if we say 11:10, 10 past 11 Paris-Brussels time, this morning, we will have you back then. Remember, if you're using social media, to use the hashtag Sport Official, OFFICIAL, Sport Official, as your hashtag, because that helps us spread the word and bring more people into the network. Let them know what's going on. So take a minute, if you are on Twitter or social media, any other social media, to put that out there, Sport Official, and tell us whether you're enjoying today and what you think of the event so far. Do not click on leave the meeting when we have a wee break. Just check your mic and your camera are switched off. That saves problems with coming back in. And if you don't like your refreshments, well, that's on you. Okay, so we'll see you after the break. 10 minutes after the hour, we'll see you back here. Thank you very much. There we go, Sport Official. That's what we want you to be tweeting today all around the world. Welcome back to our second session today, which turns our focus to the International Federation of Sports Officials, IFSO. We have 4 presentations, so thanks very much for taking part in the ONSIDE poll as well. We've just closed that now, and that's given us some good feedback on ONSIDE presentations. We'll ask you a bit later about the IFSO, but we've got 4 speakers here to tell us a bit more about IFSO, and we're going to start with Patrick Vajda and Jan Vlasblom today. Patrick has 48 years experience in insurance and risk management with a focus on sport organisations and major sports events. Patrick was a member of the refereeing commission of the International Fencing Federation and was an international fencing referee. He refereed many international competitions, including the Olympic finals in Montreal in 1976 and Moscow in 1980. He was also the refereeing Olympic delegate at Seoul in 1988. In 1985, Patrick was involved in the creation of AFCAM, the French Association for Sport Officials, which brings together 240,000 referees and judges from all sports across France. He is the president of AFCAM. He has been since 2010 and is the founding president of the International Federation for Sports Officials, which represents all judges and referees at the global level. For the past 5 years, Patrick Vajda has been a member of the Athletes Entourage Commission of the International Olympic Committee. So we'll hand on to Patrick, and take it away, Patrick.
Thanks a lot, David. First of all, I would like to thank the ONSIDE project team. What you did and what we did together is a really fantastic job, and I am really very happy about the result. Thank you very much for also for all of you join us today. It's a fantastic story. It's the beginning of a fantastic story into sport for sport officials. Perhaps we will go to the next slide. Why we have created it in March 2019. IFSO is really a totally new international federation. Why we create IFSO is just because we saw, and it was the same thing in France when we began in 1985 by creating AFCAM. We saw that it's more or less we are more or less forgotten by everybody. Everybody thinks to us when the decision is wrong or when they believe that the decision is wrong. But we are working in sport. We are a workforce in sport. And I would like to insist on one word. We are actors of the competition. Without us, no sport, no competition, no sport competition. And I think it's really very important to create a group of people working for this particular category who are judges and referees. when we created AFCAM 35 years ago, I was really surprised to see that the question asked by a FIFA referee or a football referee were exactly the same as the questions asked by a taekwondo, fencing, or boxing referee. We have all of them the same question, the same problem, and in a lot of cases the same solution. I think it's a reason why it's very important for us not to stay totally isolated, like we did in France or like we did also in UK, to create an association in which you have all sports. It's a very, very, very good solution to understand what are the problems of judges and referees. Next slide, please. What is also very interesting is the fact that without ONSIDE, IFSO certainly was never created. We create ONSIDE during the ONSIDE project, and the idea was born during the ONSIDE, particularly thanks to Sport Officiating UK, the French Association AFCAM, and also perhaps specifically to two other members who are NOC NSF, which is the Olympic Committee of the Netherlands, and the city of The Hague, who was our first real partner. Without these four members, and most particularly the city of The Hague, we are not able to create this international federation. As you know, we are not athletes, we are not elected people, we are not staff members. Nevertheless, we are essential to sports or for sports. This is what I would like to underline. Without us, no sports competition. Sorry, I repeat what I say 2 minutes ago, but it is really very important, not for you because you know perfectly what I am saying, but for all the people working in the world of sport. And I was really surprised when I learned that for the ONSIDE project was the first one organized about refereeing or sport official, but in all sports and not only in one specific sport. I know that some other projects took place in rugby league or in basketball, but ONSIDE was the first one and is the first one on a multi-sport side. Next slide, please. And I would like just to show you the symbol of IFSO. This is the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague. Perhaps you know that the word arbitration in French means arbitrage, which is the same thing, even if it is not exactly the same topic. It's a fantastic symbol, thanks to Jan, who organized this first meeting in The Hague. Jan, now it's to you.
Yes, thank you, Patrick. Good morning, everybody. I'm happy to tell more about
Sorry, Jan,
IFSO.
Hold on, Jan, I'll just stop you there. Sorry, I never fully introduced you properly. We need people to know exactly who you are. So I apologize. I'll just skip in and make sure I properly introduce you. But Jan, for those of us who don't know who Jan is working as project manager for the Dutch National Olympic Committee, the NOC-NSF, whom he represents on the ONSIDE project. Jan is a former football referee and worked for the Dutch Football Association to reorganise officiating in football in the Netherlands. Working for the NOC, Jan has worked with 15 sports to create a master plan for the development of sport officiating in the Netherlands. He's also treasurer of the International Federation for Sports Officials, IFSO, and has been instrumental to the initiating of the federation. So that's why Jan's here. Sorry, Jan, I'll hand back across to you.
No problem. Good morning, everybody. I'm happy to tell more about IFSO. And yes, in March 2019, we organized the first assembly of IFSO in the Peace Palace in The Hague. As you can see, wonderful palace. And we in the Netherlands are very honored and delighted that we can host IFSO in The Hague, the city of justice and peace for the entire world. And we think this is a perfect match looking at the goals of IFSO, the International Federation for Sports Officials. Next slide, please. And during that first assembly, we presented the outcomes of the survey held in the ONSIDE project, and we concluded that sports and federations in different sports can learn a lot from each other because there are many general issues to develop in officiating. such as how to train communication skills of the official, how to interest more women and youth in officiating, how to organize effective coaching for the officials, the selection process for international events, stimulating fair play and anti-discrimination, how to promote officiating. So we concluded that sports can learn a lot from each other, and IFSO can be the worldwide multi-sport platform to get answers on these issues. Next slide, please. And as you see on this slide, we already have 25 members. I call them early adopters that agree with our idea of IFSO. And you can see that we have members of outdoor federations, members of indoor federations, NOCs, multi-sport organizations, and even we have the federations of school sports and university sports on board. They can not only help us to interest youth in officiating, but also can facilitate service, etc.
And since yesterday, we can add bowling and lacrosse.
Yeah, lacrosse is new and bowling is coming. Thank you, Patrick. And I hope that we can welcome more members. Next slide, please. In our statutes, we have defined the following goals for IFSO: bring together officiating bodies in all kinds of sports, as we are doing today, share knowledge and best practices, for example, on our website, obtain support and means to develop sport officials, for example, to stimulate more on-site projects, represent our officiating in bodies as the IOC and the GIFs, and organize surveys, events, and educational activities, for example, being the platform for the e-learnings Janie told us about, and all to support federations and bodies to develop an effective policy for the referees and judges. Next slide, please. The main principles of IFSO are that we are a not-for-profit organization, and that we will not interfere in internal affairs of members. If there is a problem or a conflict between a national and international federation in a specific sport, we will not interfere unless both parties ask IFSO for advice. And of course, we are impartial and we have a policy of counteracting all kinds of discrimination. Next slide, please. And how we are making our activity plan. Well, every year we choose one of the focus areas to develop on the left side, and per issue we first organize a survey or a pilot project. Then we present and discuss the outcomes in an event like this and stimulate and organize activities. And for this year and 2021, we selected the development of female officials and the development of effective pathways for officials as the issues to develop. And in the next presentations, you will hear more about these two activities. Next slide, please. Our board is, we have 12 members in our board in a perfect gender balance, as you see, 6 women and 6 men. Representing summer and winter sports, representing members of YOC and GIFs, organizations of education and training, NOCs, and multi-sport refereeing associations. So as you see, a nice diversity of backgrounds in our board members. And of course, we have a Secretary General, this is Charlotte Girard, and you will see her in the next presentation. Next slide, please. So yeah, IFSO is strongly supported by the YOC, and we would be delighted to welcome more members. And if your sport or relevant organization is not on this list, please contact with us and we will give you all the information needed. So who's next? Next slide, please. And on this slide, you see our contact details. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hand back to David.
Yes, playing with these cameras and mics. Thank you, Jan and Patrick. That's excellent, and yeah, good insight there into IFSO. We're going to ask for you to get involved again. We've got another poll coming up, so let's have your thoughts on IFSO and what you've heard there, and whether you think it can play a key role. And Patrick and Jan and the IFSO team are really interested in hearing from you. So let's have a shot at that. Give us some of your feedback if you can. Question for Patrick and Jan then from me. We've seen a few things that you're focused on, a number of different areas you're looking to support. What do you feel, we'll start with Patrick, what do you feel is IFSO's most valuable role?
The most one, not very easy to answer. I think that perhaps for the next year, it will be in our, I can say in our schedule, in our program, is the development of female officials. We have an incredible problem with the fact that we have a very small number of women referees, and it is not a normal situation. We really have to find solution, to find, I can say, some recipe in order to increase the number of women as a referee or a judge in sport.
Yeah, good, Patrick. And Jan, I mean, that's really good, Patrick, because you've teed up the next section, of course, so we're going to be moving into that and have a good discussion there. Jan, your thoughts on the value?
Yeah, I think the most important role of IFSO can be to bring together the sports and inspire sports to learn from other sports and stimulate doing things together. In the Netherlands, the last 10 years, we organized with 15-20 sports in the first week of October, the week of the official. And by doing together, we got far more impact in the promotion of officiating than doing it per sport. So there's one example of doing together things and give it more impact.
Yeah, good. Okay, and clearly that's what we're about today as well, is making sure we bring people together. So great. There are some questions there. What we'll do later on, we're going to have a panel discussion later on for some of our panelists who will come back and be involved in that. So continue with the questions. Keep those questions coming. And thanks very much to Jock Peggy, I see on there from World Rugby, who's been sharing some of the information and links to World Rugby's training and education portfolio and what's available online. So, you know, we'd encourage you to do that. That's what this is about. This forum is about you, and is about making sure that you get something out of this that benefits you as an individual and the organizations you're part of. So continue to ask the questions, continue to share the details in that chat section, and also ask some questions in the Q&A. We're using all of the things we've got available to us today, and the poll is still open there. We've still got a few of you who haven't taken part in that poll, so we'd like you to, if you can, have a look and give us some feedback on IFSO and how important you think IFSO can be for you, because we want to develop that knowledge. So we're going to switch now to something that Patrick raised there, and it's come up in a number of questions about female officials. How do we support female officials? How do we ensure a gender equality so that we're seeing more and more female officials making their mark on world sport? And are things improving for women? Well, we've got a couple of leading officials to provide some insight to that. Charlotte Girard-Fabre, who's joining us, and Janie Frampton, who we heard from earlier. First of all, Charlotte, sorry, you haven't heard from today yet. Charlotte was an international ice hockey referee from 2003 to 2018, involved in 6 World Championships, the 2014 and 18 Olympic Winter Games, and the French men's top professional league. She's also now a handball referee and Secretary General of the International Federation for Sport Officiating, IFSO. She's had several high-profile positions related to gender equality and has been nominated by the French government. Janie, who you've heard from already today, a leading FIFA referee. We're delighted to have Janie's great insight into this area too. But without further ado, I'll hand over to Charlotte, who'll take us forward.
Thank you very much, David, for this presentation and for giving me the mic. So I would like to say hello to all our listeners and officiating enthusiasts. I'm very pleased to present you quickly 3 major points of our gender equality issues. Jenny will be great to develop some of them in a few minutes. First of all, our creation and statutes very clearly reflect our policy in support of gender equality. EOSE was created in The Hague, the International Women's Rights Day. Moreover, our statutes are from the beginning very clear on the obligation to have a board that respects the strict gender equality. We have 6 men and 6 women. We are very proud to have 2 female vice presidents, and I'm sure that the general secretary is a woman. That's me. We are also very proud to have a Women's Commission composed of international experts, both men and women. It's very important for us. The second part of my speech is where we are going. For sure, we continue to take an inventory of gender disparities in officiating all over the world, in particular with studies such as the one conducted by IFSO, which will be presented to you later. One of our goals is to help organizations to recruit more women and facilitate the retention of female talent by sharing best practices, for example. And finally, we want to promote and highlight female role models through digital campaigns. You can see the sports official campaigns. It has been a success. The next one will be for the promotion of female refereeing, for sure. To conclude my speech, I would like to say here we are very honored to be a part of the next project, the WINS project. This UE-funded project is at the heart of our concern. It's a great opportunity to go even further. But now it's a moment of a beautiful transition based on sorority. I give the mic to Janie, our Vice President and active member of Women's Commission. Thank you. But I'm alone. Jenny, you might.
There we go. How's that? So throughout the ONSIDE project, we realized that there was a real issue with our partners and other organizations around not knowing how to engage with women sports officials, how to recruit them, retain them, what they need to stay in the sport. So that's where we decided that actually, as a follow-on project from the offside, we would create a WINS project. It was firmly led by IFSO. It was their idea, and we just took it forward from there. And as Charlotte said, the importance of gender balance these days is huge in sport. When we look at our population and the split between the gender of male and female, then we need to make sure that we get it right. And of course, when you look at the links then from ONSIDE to WINS, then it's important that we make sure there is a smooth transition. The project, raising the growth and participation of female sports officials in Europe. That says it all. Could I have the next slide, please? In order to make sure that we had continuity and consistency, we wanted to work with some of our existing key partners that we'd worked with on ONSIDE. So whilst we have some new partners, which is absolutely fantastic, we wanted to make sure that we had people like EOSE as the managers, of course, because they have done such an excellent job. AFCAM, because it's important to have a spread across multi-sports. SUG, for the same reason. The University of Portsmouth, led by Dr. Tom Webb, he has done so much academic research around sports officiating in the past that they were an obvious choice to have as a partner when we were looking at having quite a big research part within this package, within this project. And then we welcomed European Hockey Federation from Belgium. That was a new partner. The Dutch Olympic Committee, an existing partner. IFSO, of course, who are one of the leads within this partnership. The National Sports Academy in Bulgaria, again, an existing partner, and European Athletics in Switzerland was an existing partner. So we have a really good mix there of existing and new partners, so we can bring new life, new ideas, but as well as keeping the continuity from one program to the next, and an understanding, of course, from one program to the next. Next slide, please. So the WINS project, we broke it down into the work packages as we've done before, and we looked at what did we need from this. People don't need to read just lots and lots of information. They want something tangible, tools that they can take away and use within their sport. So we decided that we would make this really a sort of functional project where people could use it. So we start with the research, and the research has to be quite large because there's been no strong research around the recruitment, the retention, the development of women sports officials. And we know that socially, women come into sports officiating often for different reasons than their male counterparts. So we need to harness that, gather it, and identify then how our target markets would look at that in our marketing. So the research was very, very important. And then we thought, okay, the next work package, we need a European compendium of good practice case studies on recruitment and retention of female sports officials. And in one of my previous roles with the Football Association in England, we did an awful lot around mentoring packages and programs for the retention of females, many of which were taken up by FIFA as good practice case studies. So we're going to look at creating a compendium of those where people can look at it and see what fits their sport. Not all of them will, of course, but what will fit their sport and fit their circumstance. And then have an innovative online toolkit for recruitment and retention of female sports officials, because we know that that is different to their male counterparts. So let's identify what it is so that it's something useful to take forward. And then have targeted program of mentoring and leadership for female sports officials. You know, I currently work on a huge leadership program for World Athletics, and it's fantastic and it makes a difference, and it does retain women. It does work. So this is something we need to take on board as a factor to consider within this project. And then, of course, we'll have a final conference around raising the growth and participation of female sports officials in Europe. And that, I think, is really important to make sure that we cover all of those aspects and we start to get more women, not just into officiating in sports, but staying in. And we know there's other factors to consider because, you know, women often have the responsibilities of family and work as well as their sport. But we need to look at how we can make that a little bit easier and some ideas of how to manage the situations. So next slide, please. So you can see that we were delighted when we were told in October that we had our bid had been accepted by Erasmus. So the project will start in January 2021, and then we'll look at the scope of the partner meetings, the 6th, until the project finishes in December 2023. So you can see there also the packages along the way. The research you will see takes a huge part of our time, and that's going to be so important, and obviously will be open to the public on the open source. So then we go into the compendium of good practice, which pretty much runs through 2022. And the toolkit will be hopefully completed as we stay on track towards the end of 2022, and then going into the targeted mentoring and leadership for 2023. So they're large packages, and they're going to take a huge amount of time, but we do believe this will be so important to the growth and retention of female sports officials going forward. Thank you very much. As always, on the next slide, our contact details are there for you to contact us if you have any questions within this area.
Great, Jeannie, thank you very much once again, and to Charlotte. Lots of questions coming in, lots of discussion going on in the chat, and there have been a few mentions of female officials and what we can do. So I have a question to put to both of you. Charlotte, maybe kick off with you first. What are the main barriers then to recruiting women as officials, and what do you think organisations could do better to encourage women to get involved and stay involved?
There are a lot of thank you, but there are a lot of things to do: information, education, promotion, a lot of things to do in every issues. So, in one word, it's very hard. But if you give time, if your politics is clearly to recruit women, we can do it. You have to put on the table a lot of things, but you can do it.
Yeah, okay, good. Jenny, what are your thoughts?
Thank you, David. I think my first point is your target market for your marketing strategies. Where do you go? Where do you market this to women? And it's not the same as men, because women's social lives are often quite different. So how do we put together a marketing strategy? Where do we advertise it? How do we use images within that marketing? I went to one organization, they showed me very proudly their new marketing information. Every single image on there was white man. And when I pointed it out, they went, oh my goodness, no, we didn't even think about it. So these are the things, just little things that we need to just get right. We need female role models. That's really important. Of course, we have Charlotte here as a female role model, and Julia, and then we also heard from Joy. We need more female role models to say to girls and women, see, you can do it. It's for you too.
Great, Jenny. I'm curious as well to know whether you and Charlotte feel there is a different proposition there for women. Is there a difference about why women would want to get involved necessarily to why men might want to get involved in sports officiating?
Charlotte.
Go first. Let's go.
What we have done in the small amount of research that was carried out some years ago with the Women's Sport Fitness Foundation in the UK, they looked at what attracts women to sports, what keeps them in sports in general. And this fits with officiating just as well. So I think we need to look very much about, if we want to get young women involved in sport, we have to think about image. And one thing that came up very strongly, and sorry guys, but young girls didn't like to sweat. It was about the clothes that they wore, and it was about the image and the acceptability within their peers, that was okay. So if we're going to start at that young age and encourage girls in, we have to address those issues to say among peers that this is okay, this is really acceptable. Maybe around the health and well-being and the mental health would be a really good point to start.
Yes. Education defines us about everything and about officiating for sure. We have to promote the image of officiating, of referees, and we have to promote image of female in the field. So it's about education. Since you are young, your mother told to you, don't run, you will tear your beautiful dress. We cannot do that because after we don't recruit female in sports and officiating. So we have a lot of job, hard job, but we will do it for sure.
Yeah, and Charlotte and Jenny, I coach young girls, and I've got 2 young girls myself, and that's a very important point. I've come across the point you made there about sweating. I've come across that with my own girls. Now, it's not something they might talk about, but you discover it's a hurdle. You discover later on that it comes out. So little things like that are a key help, aren't they? Particularly when it's men involved that are recruiting. I think it's really important to have that education of people involved. So thanks very much. But you're both great ambassadors, and you can see from your presentations and your smiles that there's a lot to be had out of taking that step, isn't there? Girls and women can get a lot out of being involved as sports officials.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, David.
Great. Thank you very much, Charlotte and Jenny. Fantastic to have you involved. So we heard a little bit there about, officials, and we're talking about female officials, but how do we get them involved? What are we looking for in officials? What are international sports federations looking for when they select officials? We now live in a very data-rich and tech world. So we have two great speakers now to share with us some of the views of research and data that goes behind officiating. We've got Dr. Claude Stricker and Rijul Sharda with us now. Claude is the Executive Director of the International Academy of Sports Science and Technology, known as AISTS. AISTS aims to professionalize sports management through continuing education, as we've heard there, applied research, consulting, and providing an engaging platform for industry connections. Rijul is a sports administrator based in Lausanne, Switzerland, with over 4 years of professional experience in the sports industry across 5 cities, 3 different countries. So he's been around, has Rijul, passionate about sports development. He's a graduate of the AISTS program and supported the joint study carried out by AISTS and IFSO. So without any further ado, I'll hand over to you, Claude.
Thank you, David. Thank you very much, and good morning or good afternoon to everyone. This is really a pleasure to just introduce actually the study we did in Lausanne. We are here at the Olympic capital. So our sport management program is held on the campus of EPFL and University of Lausanne. As you can see here, the picture where we are now. So at walking distance of the headquarters of many international federations, and of course, starting with the International Olympic Committee. So for our class of students, it's easy somehow to conduct what we call in our program team projects. So you can go to the next slide. Team projects are actually mandate given by this organization to produce relevant research. And in this context, the client was the International Federation of Sport Officials, IFSO. So thanks again also for this opportunity. We had the presentation before. So these projects are interesting because our class is composed of many different nationalities. It's a very international program. So we get this sensitivity to all kind of culture, very diversified background in sport. You will have our participants, Rijul presenting in a moment. He's from India. So it gives us also this really international understanding of sport. Maybe next slide, where we really have to integrate this dimension and to also learn from being, doing research for servicing the client and bringing useful content, useful result. So it's a pleasure to give now the floor, maybe next slide, to our participants who was part of the project, who will present all the results. And just before I pass the floor, just mentioning that we do many projects with many different international sport federations, starting with the International University Sport Federation, FISU, who will present right after us. FISU is a neighbor actually in the same building. And that's how we leverage here of being in the World Olympic capital with our postgraduate class. So now it is my pleasure, next slide, to give the floor to the presentation of this project on the inquiry of the selection criteria that are in International Sport Federation for selecting sport officials. So please, Rijul, just mentioning that Rijul, his sport is obviously cricket, being from India. And it's also interesting because, as you know, cricket needs also officials. So very international perspective, and you will see the result, very interesting and relevant in the context of this conference. Please, Rijul.
Thank you, Claude. To begin with, I would like to state that my team and I were very fortunate that AISTS, Mr. Patrick Wajda and Mr. Eric Santron gave us the opportunity to under this project for IFSO. And it is an honor, indeed an honor, to be presenting to you all on this wonderful occasion. The title for our project, as can be seen on your screen, was An Inquiry into the Selection Criteria of Sports Officials by International Sports Federation. Moving on to the next slide. Just to give you a brief introduction about the team that conducted this research, we had Eric McKenzie from Perth, Australia, Xiaohan Wen from Beijing, China, and myself from New Delhi, India. Moving on to the next slide. To talk a little bit about the scope of this project, 6 key points have been highlighted, as can be seen on the screen. The first one being the federation's comparison. 4 key demographics were identified, which were gender, age, years of experience, and continental affiliation of the sports officials. Second was the selection criteria, in which, along with the demographics, fitness and skills and conflict of interest were also observed. Third was the career pathway, in which licenses and certificates, progression levels, and training and education of the sports officials were observed. In the Olympic comparisons, demographics of the sports officials at the last 2 summer and the last 2 Winter Olympic Games were compared. For FISU, the data from the Universiades was analyzed and then further compared with the data from the Olympic Games. And the last one being market analysis, which was a part of our project, but it is not relevant here. Moving on to the next slide. Now we will talk a bit about methodology. So for conducting this project, we used questionnaires for our primary research, which were followed up with in-depth and detailed interviews with the primary contacts at the federations. Secondary research was conducted using public documents and through internet research. In-depth data analysis was conducted on these findings, and through our primary and secondary research, we finalized the document. Moving on to the next slide. A total of 26 federations were approached to be a part of this project, of which 18 agreed. The logos of the participants can be seen on the screen. 4 of these were Winter Olympic federations. If you can press next, these will highlight on the screen. 10 were Summer Olympic federations. They will also highlight on the screen after clicking. And the last 4 were non-Olympic federations. Moving on to the next slide. Now I will present you with the survey findings and then go over a few of our recommendations. The first one being only 4 federations were able to provide us with a full sports officials database. Now that is using our definitions. So while they may have more comprehensive database, we only ask for gender, age, years of experience, continental affiliation, and all these demographics at the last 2 Olympics that they were involved in. 10 federations had a selection criteria document for their sports officials. All but 1 federation evaluated their sports officials. 8 federations provided e-learning modules for their sports officials, with 14 federations providing education opportunities for their officials. 12 federations stated that there was a difference in their remuneration of that their sports official received. This was usually differentiated on the basis of the level of competition. Moving on to the next slide. Following on from the survey findings, we focused on 3 areas with the room for improvement, and 3 areas that the federations are currently doing a good job. Starting with the room for improvement, the sports officials database, we recommend that there should be a consistent recording system across all the federations about the key demographic data. E-learning modules could be increased across federations. This was something that IFSO was interested in to increase the education opportunities for the sports officials. And finally, as mentioned earlier, IFSO are keen to identify if federations had a selection criteria document for the sports officials to improve transparency and governance, as only 10 federations had a selection criteria document for their sports officials. Our conclusions were that all federations should have a document which outlines the selection criteria for sports officials for all federation sanctioned events. Included in this document should be age restrictions, fitness requirements, and sport-specific requirements at the least. Along with this, a document containing a clear and transparent evaluation process should be made available to all the registered sports officials. Moving on to the good. Federations didn't have a structured only 1 federation didn't have a structured pathway for the sports officials. What this involved varied between the federations, and further details on the intricacies of this are provided in the written report that was provided to IFSO. Our recommendation for this were, all federations should have a document that outlines the pathways of the sports officials from national to continental and finally to international level. in this pathway document should be the licenses and certification requirement for each level of official, along with the training courses required to be granted this certification and to maintain the certification. Moving on to the training and education courses, these are usually conducted by regional or national federations, and often attendance is required to maintain certification. Our requirement is that even if the international federation does not control the sports officials, they should ensure that all the continental and national federations provide the same educational opportunities for all the sports officials. Regarding the remuneration of the sports officials, a guideline for remuneration and expenses for the sports officials should be provided to all the sports officials and made available to event organizers if they require the use of international federation sports officials for their event. Included in this document at the least should be travel expenses, accommodation, per diem costs, and uniform requirements. Next slide, please. Okay, now moving on to the demographic breakdown from the data that was collected from the 18 federations. As you can see on this slide, 71% of the registered sports officials were males. We used the percentage from the total number of sports officials for these slides to provide an overall picture of the landscape for the sports officials. This may produce numbers which are a bit skewed towards the federations that had large number of registered sports officials. For example, one federation had over 2,000 officials, while one only had 25. Next slide, please. This slide has been taken from the benchmark document that was provided to IFSO. It has been de-identified for the purpose of this presentation to protect the confidentiality of the federations who provided the data. As you can see, this enables IFSO to benchmark the federations against each other to see how they compare. The gender split ranges from 52% to 91% towards males. We provided breakdowns like this for the three more demographics as well, which were age groups, years of experience, and continental affiliation. Due to time constraints, I am not presenting that. Moving on to the next slide. We further split these demographics down into Winter Olympic federations, Summer Olympic federations, and non-Olympic federations. This slide represents the Winter Olympic federations. Given that there were only 4 Winter Olympic federations that participated in this study, and only 2 of them were able to provide a data for a couple of demographics, the numbers may not be representative of all the winter sports federations. The key points from this slide are, it is a very experienced group of sports officials with 29% having over 20 years of experience. And probably it's not a surprising fact that they were also of an older age demographic because of the years of experience on them. Another point was that it is a very European-centric representation with about 71% coming from the continent of Europe. Next slide, please. Given that there were only, now this is a slide that represents the data about the 10 summer international federations. Given that there were 10 Olympic federations, that this slide closely reflects on the overall numbers of the sports officials. I'm going to give you a few seconds to just observe this slide. Next slide, please. To summarize our demographic findings, in terms of the gender, we can clearly see that it is male dominated. No federation had rules around which gender could officiate male or female matches. The limiting factor was often the fitness requirements of the federations. About the age, summer federations have a younger profile compared to winter federations. Some federations had age restrictions in their statutes, while most did not. In terms of experience, winter federations had relatively experienced sports officials, while non-Olympic sports have comparatively less experience to the average. Many federations did not record years of experience due to it not being a factor of remuneration or selection. In terms of continental affiliation, almost half of the sports officials are European, with the winter sports much higher. Moving on to the next slide, please. As mandated by the client, which was IFSO, we compare the demographics of the sports officials at the last 2 Olympic Games. First, we look at the 2 most recent Winter Olympic Games, Sochi 2014 and Pyeongchang 2018. Next slide, please. As mentioned earlier, from the images on the screen, you can see that the percentage of female officials at Pyeongchang increased by 5% from Sochi, indicating a move towards a more gender-balanced split. The age group of the sports officials at Pyeongchang tends to be younger than Sochi, with over 50% under the age of 39. In terms of the years of experience, it remained almost the same for both the games. It can also be observed that there was a shift from European sports officials to American sport officials from Sochi to Pyeongchang Games. It's also interesting to see that there were no sports officials from Asia, even though the 2018 games were held in Asia. A reason for this could be the limited number of winter federations participating in this research. Moving on to the next slide. We now are going to talk about the last two Summer Olympic Games, which were the London 2012 and the Rio 2016 Games. Next slide, please. From this slide, it can be observed that London had a very good gender split, but Rio was more male dominated. In regards to age, the sports officials are trending towards an older age demographic, while the years of experience of the sports officials at the last two editions almost remain the same. In terms of continental affiliation, there was a shift from Europe towards America. A possible explanation for this could be the fact that the games were hosted in the continent. Moving on to the final slide. So this brings us to the conclusion. It must be noted that due to time constraints, this was a very brief presentation about the project. Thank you very much for listening. It was a privilege. I now hand the mic back to David.
Thank you, Rijul, and thank you, Claude. On that, just looking back on all that you've looked at, Rijul, don't leave me yet. Stay there. I'm going to come back to you. You and Claude, what did you find most interesting in the work there that you and the data that you've looked into?
The most interesting bit was about basically analyzing it, further analyzing the male and female with respect to ages. It was not a part of the project, but a lot can be done in this regard. Like, it's a very interesting data set, and it's the first of its kind it's the first time this kind of study has been done. And when you make these kind of data analytics, you know what is your target audience and where you need to improve. So by identifying these groups, we can, IFSO can make modules, like also the fact that we got to learn about the e-learning modules, and we made these kind of recommendations. So it gives them a platform to read about the data and further work, handwrite work, tailor-made work for the particular demographics.
Great. And Claude, I mean, how important do you feel that research and data is to the work you're trying to do, but the wider work of improving officiating?
I think first result of that is to engaging the international federation as well. You know, they play a key role. They have to take initiatives and support the development of their officials. So I think it's a good somehow results in terms of engaging them. So I would say that that's the first thing that we look forward also to develop even more. And then, of course, you have these aspects related to the specificity of each sport, winter, summer, and so on. So where you can see there are different patterns, and it's also linked to what was said before, the type of competencies you need, what kind of officials are you talking about, the different roles, etc. So it needs data behind to have a strategy that makes sense in the future for IFSO and all what you plan to do with the e-learning, etc.
Yeah, so effectively, Claude, you're handing it back to all of our guests and all of our attendees today to say that we can produce that, but it's what people actually do with it that matters. Great, Rijul, Claude, that's been excellent. Some great insight there, and I'm sure people will be quite interested and fascinated by some of that. So thanks very much for your presentations. We're actually going to conclude today's event now in terms of our speakers, and we will have a panel to look back on some of it shortly. But with our last speakers of the day, we know we can't stand still. We've got to be looking to the future, and we've got to be considering the value of these projects and organizations. And as Claude said, what we do with this information, what we do with this network and coming together. So how do we help you to affect the change going forward? What is the ONSIDE legacy? And where do we think that IFSO can go from here? So we've got two people who have an idea. Patrick Vajda, you heard from earlier, the founding president of IFSO. And we'll also hear now from the Secretary General and CEO of the International University Sports Federation, FISU, Eric Santron. Eric began his career in the private sector with academic circles too, and national and international sports organisations. He was captivated, he tells me, by the university sports movement and joined FISU in 1985. He's been director of the Games, general director, and now Secretary General CEO since 2007. FISU are a founding member and key supporter of IFSO. So we've heard from you already, Patrick, but let's bring you back in, founding president of IFSO. Give me your thoughts on where we're going now then, Patrick.
Thank you, David. I will try, because our future is certainly, I hope, a very, very, very long way. First of all, I would like to thank particularly Eric and FISU about what you just heard concerning the ISTS study. Without FISU, we were not able to make this study. So thank you very much, Eric. And I think also you give a lot of information to Regil and the team. And it was really an interesting study and an interesting result. What we can say, next slide, please, is the sport community needs judge and referees. When I say that, I have the impression that everybody on this Zoom conference knows that. Yes, but I have the impression to repeat that very, very often. And sometimes I have the impression that some people of the sport world does not understand or do not understand what I say. Like the athletes, we are part of the games, we are part of the competition, we are part of the match. And I repeat what I said at the very beginning, we are actors of the event. Without us, no sport competition. What is important to remember, if you do not have rules, you do not have sport. If you do not have respect of the rules, you do not have sport. If you have no judge and no referees, you do not have competition. I think these sentences are very strong and perhaps explain the importance of the judge and referees. Next slide, please. And Eric is now for you.
Yes, thank you, Patrick. Hello to everyone. Well, the reason why FISU has been involved in the project in both IFSO and also the AITS research is that FISU, for example, next game we will have in Chengdu in 21, in August 21, we will have about 500 referees and judges involved. And of course, for many years, through the games and as well the World Championships and the World Cups, FISU has always been a big consumer of judges and referees, and we know very well that without all that community of referees and judges, we will have no games and no activities. That's why it was so obvious that FISU had to be involved. And fourthly, we also realized that not too many people recognize the judges and referees' work. Starting with the fact that when you have any kind of game or competition, it creates sometimes a kind of frustration from the loser side. And not only the players, frustration from the losers as players, but also their entourage and fans. And I strongly believe, and we strongly believe, that all those people should have and should be more resilient. But it's not only a problem of sports. It's a problem that is now a problem of our society. We do not respect the teachers. We do not respect the police. We do not respect any rules. And sometimes we have to think about how to promote better value of respect, not only in sport, but all around this world. And linked to this, you never heard on TV when you have a football game that the players did a great job, the stadium is fantastic, the public was great, but no one talk about the quality of the referees. And sometimes I'm a bit frustrated myself to say, okay, that game was fantastic, but because the referee was good. And this is something that really make me a bit sad, that no one is talking about the performance of the referees, but more pointing the mistakes. And everyone can make a mistake. But it's unfair that the judges and the referees do not deserve to be respected and have a kind of understanding if they are even making a mistake. But the fair play is not only for the athletes and players. The fair play must be as well for the referees and judges. And fourthly, this behavior is not only limited to the professional sport, and it's even sometimes worse at the low level and the amateur sports. And for sure, something has to be done to educate the sports people and the entourage. And then next step for you, Patrick.
Thank you, Eric. It was really a surprise to see that no one organization in the world before IFSO speaks globally about judge and referees, about us. The first time I have a global discussion at the international level was when I make a presentation about judge and referees at the IOC Entourage Commission of the athletes. So it was 5 years ago. And since this date, I am a member of this commission. And I have to repeat always that judge and referees are part of the games, part of the event. I think our voice, our problem, our question are important, because if we are not in a good shape, if we are not in a good hotel, if we are not able to eat, for example, during the competition, we are not good. And the result of the competition will not be good. So to take consideration about our job is something I can say more than important for the integrity of the result of the event, of the sport event. IFSO was created to give and to give a voice to judges and referees. We are, and we try to be, the judge and referees voice. We are not an union. This is really important, because we will not have the intention to go into individual problems or questions. We just want to share good practice. We just want to. We know perfectly that there is a fantastic idea in some sport, and the best way is to share this fantastic idea with the other sport in order to increase the level of all the referees and judges. The next slide, please. So IFSO, as I told you, we have good information coming from, for example, I just give an example. Football has a very high level organization. Which is not the case of other federations. Perhaps it's a question of money, perhaps not, I don't know. And this very good situation in the world of football could be also explained, and perhaps some smaller federation or less poorer federation could be interested by the recipe given by the rich federation. So to share the good practice, to share the good system, to share the good area, I can say, of respect, it's something very, very important. And also, I think that we have to put the young people in the world of refereeing. Since around 20 years now, we began to have very young referee for very young category. For example, if you have 10 years old, your referee have 12 or 13 years old. This is a very, very, very important way in order to increase the quality of the refereeing of the referees and judges. When you begin very young, you understand the sense of responsibilities very young. And this has an impact not only in your life as a referee, but also in your life as a man, as a woman or man. So this is also a very good point, to begin very young and to explain to the club, to the federation and international federation, that they have to help young generation and young judge and referees. Eric?
Yes, and of course, to achieve this goal, the next slide, we need to have international partners, but as well national partners. And talking about the international partners, of course, the first one are the International Sport Federation, because they are the one responsible for the education of the referees at the highest level, and they can also promote the work of the referees at the national level inside the national federation. campaign was supposed to start at the beginning of this year to promote IFSO amongst the all international sports federation. But as you know, in March, everything was closed. My colleagues from the international federation both in Lausanne or other countries where most of them in home working, they were focusing, of course, on the cancellation of the events. All the events have been moved to 21, and now we start to see a bit better the end of the tunnel. But anyway, we will start now to contact them again, because 2021 will be a very busy year for all international federation. And maybe people do not realize, but all the referees and judges could not work, could not practice, could not train during this period. And I don't know sincerely what will be the level of the referee and judges in 21, because there are no games, no competitions. And everyone talk again about the athletes, but what about the referees that have nothing to do for nearly 1 year? Then, of course, we have to convince the National Olympic Committee to be part of us. We have already a very strong one in Netherlands, very active for us. But we need to have additional National Olympic Committee, because most of them, they are in connection with the National Sports Federation. And it's important for us to have one contact in one country. We cannot go to all national sports federation in the world, but we can go to a National Olympic Committee and then cooperate with us to promote the values of IFSO through the National Sports Federation. And of course, as I just mentioned for Fiji, the major sports organizers, we have more than 100 games around the world. And all those people, the multi-sport games, they need referees and judges in different sports. And we have the World Games that are very important. We have, of course, the university games, but as well military games, and all those games should be partners of IFSO, because they are the one needing referees and judges to run the events. And without them, there will be no events at all. And of course, all the referees association that have to be obviously part of us. But after the discussion now, as well, the 2 hours discussion that we just had, it's how to export the ONSIDE project model to the rest of the world. And I believe that is also for IFSO an important role, that to say, okay, we have now a fantastic model that has been created in Europe. Can we export that kind of model all around the world? And to be a bit more recognized as well in terms of, next slide, please, to the whole global sports community, it is clear that what we are planning to work on, and we have already started, is to have a recognition from the major sports global association. The one is, of course, GSF. GSF has nearly 100 full members and about nearly 20 associated members, but no one is an association of referees or judges. And I believe that now we have to work very hard to get the recognition as an associated member of IFSO. This is a task for the future. Then if you look at the IOC, IOC has as well, of course, they have the NOCs all around the world, but they have about 70, probably 70 more, even more recognized organization. And again, no one organization recognized by IOC is dealing with referees and judges. They have commission for fair play, they have a bunch of commissions, but no one is dealing with referees and judges. And even, next slide, if we, thanks to our friend Patrick, we have received a lot of support from President Bach from IOC. I believe that they are not, of course, in favor to support us, but to get the recognition will be another discussion. And of course, regarding GISF, IFSO is very new, and you need to have 4 or 5 years existence, and to have, of course, a sufficient number of membership to be able to ask for to apply for your membership. And it is, of course, what will be our duty for the next couple of months, is to try to increase the membership and of course to start to build a dossier that will be presented to GISF to make sure that let's say 2.5 years, 3 years, we will be able to be recognized by GISF. What is your, Patrick?
Yes, thank you. Next slide, please. We are very proud and honored by the fact that IFSO is a legacy of the ONSIDE project. It's a difficult task, but we are really very proud to do it. So this project, the ONSIDE project, does not end today. On the contrary, today we are at the very beginning of the project. This project, as perhaps you remember, was created by 13, 14, 15 different associations through Europe. We must keep sharing. We must keep continuously, and thanks to you, we will be able to enrich our project. What is important to remember, as IFSO, we are not the owner of ONSIDE. You are the owners. And the entire sport community is the owner of the ONSIDE project. And this is really a very important thing. Without you, we cannot continue. So it is because we will have your help that we will be stronger and stronger. And I am sure that with our member, we will be able, thanks to the job done by Julie and Jenny, our e-learning platform, and more we are, stronger we are. So it's clear that we need you on board. So please join us. This is very important for the future of IFSO, but not IFSO. IFSO is nothing. What is important is judges, referees, and officials. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Eric. Very good, passionate presentations there. We're going to wrap up the IFSO sessions now, and clearly there's an appeal there to you from Patrick and Eric to join IFSO, strengthen the credibility and the influence of sports officials. As Patrick says, it needs numbers, it needs people to get involved and to contribute, and that's what makes the strength of sports officials and gives it a cohesive voice across the world. So let's do that and grow the network. We're going to relaunch our third poll now. We had it earlier and it was just asking you what you think of IFSO and how IFSO can play a leading role. If you've taken part earlier, that's fine, we've got those results, but if you'd like to, if you didn't get the chance to do that, the poll's up there again now, and maybe you might want to reflect on what you've heard there now from some more speakers about the importance of IFSO, and again, you know, whether you want to be part of that as well, and what you want from it. So it's great to hear there. We're going to finish now. We're going to finish the event today with a panel discussion where we can have a bit of a reflection on what we've heard. So I'd like to welcome back to our stage Patrick, Jeannie and Claude, who are going to be part of this discussion. We've got questions for each of our panelists, and then we'll take some questions from our delegates too. So take the opportunity again, whether you want to put the question into the chat box or into the Q&A box. We've got lots of questions in there. We've had 42 questions so far answered in the Q&A today with our busy representatives trying to get back to each of you, and some fantastic discussions going on within there in the chat box. So it's great to see so many people taking the chance to connect and support each other. And that's what today's about. So welcome back to our panelists, Patrick, Jeannie, Claude. We'll kick off, as I say, with some questions for each of you. And the first one that I want to put to each of you today to get us thinking is, what are the 3 words which come to your mind when you think about sports officials? And I know we'll keep it clean. We'll go with Patrick. Patrick, give me the 3 words first of all.
Yes. Equity, objectivity, and respect.
Very good. You'd think you thought about these 3 words. That's excellent. Jeannie, what do you think? What are the 3 words that come to mind when you think of sports officials?
Leadership, commitment, and passion.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, excellent. And Claude, what about you?
So I would say, well, I need to be complimentary with all the great words that were just said. So I would say education, values, and progress.
Excellent, excellent. So yeah, I think that reflects a lot of what we've heard today, and I'm sure others will have other thoughts out there too. But I think it's really important. The reason for asking the question, of course, is to get these things in our minds about what is it that's important about sports officials and what should we be standing for as sports officials to gain that credibility. So I think they're really good answers. Okay, Patrick, let's come back to you. You mentioned earlier that there remains a concern about the respect for referees. Do you see improvement in that, in understanding of and the respect for the role of sports officials globally? And if you don't, or if the trend is too slow, how can we improve that?
It's a very difficult question. The situation today is not fantastic in terms of respect. The respect of the referee, of the role of the referee, the respect of the decision of the referee. Sometimes I'm very surprised by the discussion coming from a player with the referee. The decision is done. The decision is taken. The referee will not change his mind. So why you lose your time to discuss? It's not necessary. You have a risk to take an exclusion or a red card or a yellow card or something like that. So why you discuss? Please concentrate yourself to what you have to do after. Perhaps the decision is wrong. We are human beings. We make and we made, and I made certainly a mistake, but the decision is done. So please respect the decision. If you do not respect the decision, the sport does not exist anymore. So this is really an important point, respect. And what I saw at the TV, for example, is worse and worse every day. In France, every day, we have a problem with, I can say, at the beginning is only a discussion. At the end is a fight. And at the end, we have around, just one number. Per year, we have around 1,000, what we say, fight or aggression against a referee, physical fight against a referee in sport in France. I am speaking about all sports. And this number increases every year. It does not decrease, it increases every year. So how we can, I try to find a way to find a better solution. For example, thanks to the law, we have a specific law, but the impact is too slow for the moment. And what I see in the other country, I am not optimistic. For the moment, I am really not optimistic.
So Patrick, where does the greatest burden of responsibility lie? Is it with the education of the players themselves? Is it the coaches, managers? Or is there more responsibility on referees to be part of that education process?
I think that what I made a lot of speech in front of very, very young people, 12 years old, 10 years old. I was very surprised how quickly they understand what I explain. They are respectful. They are totally dedicated and to what we have to do to our job and to our passion also. They understand perfectly the mistake and the fact that it's possible to make mistake. But when you go to older and older people, it's exactly the opposite. They do not understand. When a football referee takes a decision in a stadium, in a big stadium for 80,000 people, you have 40% who are totally agree with the decision, 40% who are would totally disagree because they are a supporter of the two teams. And in the middle, perhaps you have 20% people who say the decision is right. So it's not fair. And the newspaper, for example, are not fair. The media in general are not fair with us. They are in a stadium at the top level with 26 screens, and we are alone in the middle of the stadium, totally alone with 22 players around us, or 30, depending the activity or the sports. So they have to understand that there is a difference between what they see where they are and what we see in the middle of the stadium. Is really totally different. And at the end, the decision maker is the referee and only the referee. So if you do not understand that, you cannot demonstrate why it's necessary to respect the decision of the referee. And the press and the media in this area really does not help us.
Yeah, okay. I think that's fair, Patrick, and I think it's an important point that education's at the heart of it, isn't it? I think, and what you're talking about in terms of children, getting to children early and helping them to understand the role of the referee and the simple fact that if the official's not there, they don't have a game. So yeah, I think that's really important. And media is a really good one too. You know, I've had a lot of experience in the sports media, and it's interesting how, as many sports have become more professional, the contact that perhaps used to be there or is still there in more amateur sports is lost often between sports officials and media, where you used to be able to perhaps have a wee drink with them after a game or talk to them, have a drink. I've found as a journalist in the past that started to move away when games became more professional, and there wasn't the opportunity to learn as a journalist from officials, which is something I always enjoyed and valued when I was a member of the media. So education, I think, is key there. Janie, let's move on to you. We've got a big question from lots of people coming in about, we know the importance of sports officials, but we know how crucial they are for competitions and events. But how do we attract and keep them? What tips could you give to some of our attendees today for attracting, recruiting and retaining officials, particularly at grassroots level?
I think, David, I think the first thing to point out is the only thing we seem to hear in the media about sports officials is a negativity. And I think we need to change that. I've been a football referee for 30 years, and I'm not going to admit any more years. And for me, I could count on less than one hand the situations that were negative experiences for me. And what we don't do is we don't promote well enough the benefits coming from sports officiating. It has given me the most fantastic life. And when I talk to young people, I say to them that I have used that conduit of refereeing to actually take the opportunities and expand the opportunities in my life. You know, extraordinary things happen to very ordinary people, and officiating has the opportunity to do that to young people. So I think there's a few things that are key. You know, one thing is we need to change the concept, absolutely change it, and the perception that it is dull and boring, because we are anything but dull and boring. We need to change the concept that it's an integral part of sport, and we need national governing bodies of sports to help us with this. Coaching and playing are not the only cool parts of sport. Even being an administrator or refereeing is really cool. So we need to change those concepts. So the media can help, schools can help. You know, in football, we have schools programs that we go into children as young as 7 to make them realize that it can be fun and it can be cool to be a sports official. So I think it is about raising the profile of the role of the sports official across all sports and making that cool to young people. And that has to be media, schools, and national governing bodies.
Great. I think that's a great message, Janie. And, you know, I think that's one that all of our attendees can take away today. And I think there's a great message in that. How do we make refereeing, officiating cool? And you're right. You know, I've met many officials who've got some fantastic stories of their travels around the world and events, fantastic events they've been at. And we don't really see that very often, do we? We don't really see that talked about publicly. So maybe there's a little message for everybody today to as to how you can share that locally. Can you talk about the excitement of your job? Perhaps slide aside the desire you might have sometimes to talk about how somebody got in your back last week, or in terms of that being the first thing you're thinking about. If we can all be ambassadors for refereeing and for officiating, maybe the first thing we mention is the excitement or the things that went well, in terms of giving the message out, because you never know who you might be speaking to and whether they may be the next official. So yeah, there's no doubt it's difficult, isn't it, to retain referees and keep them involved. But I think there's some really good lessons there, Janie. So thanks for that. I hope people have been writing those down. I will move on to, I want to get through as many questions as I can and give people the chance to ask you some questions too. So Claude, we'll come back to you now about research. We talked about research earlier on. So how important do you think it is to conduct further research around sport officiating, and how much does it help us understand and develop the sector?
Yes, well, actually, I answered a little bit before to this question.
Good.
Again, I think it's necessary to have a more in-depth understanding. You know, we had this great presentation explaining our core competencies, generic competencies, then specialized by sport functional perspective of it. So definitely we need to have this data to stick with the reality of each sport, because again, the competencies can be very different. I mean, if you are in skiing and it's a matter of controlling a gate, where you can pick almost good skier and volunteer and explain them how to do the job versus, you know, playing referee in boxing match. It's kind of different. So definitely it needs to be also controlled with data. And just to rebound to what was said before, which I totally share, I would say, why not, and I'm not talking necessarily for research, but for education in general, in our sport management programs all over the world. I mean, there are sport management students all over the world. Why not to somehow make sure, actually, of course, you do a lot of sport practice and etc. But why not to have a mandatory component on refereeing? The students should refer or play a role of sport official somehow during his or her study. That could be something we could, you know, somehow promote by all sport management programs. It was just an idea that popped up, because it's not the first thing we might think of when we think about volunteering in an event. So definitely make sure that you understand what it is to be a sport official. And remember also that it's quite natural to somehow play a role of referring. When you were kids, basically when you were playing, improvising your game, you have nobody to organize everything. So basically you were playing this role among your mates, your friends. And somehow it's also natural, and we should also maybe look at that and use that and try to as was said before, to communicate more on this role, which is an educative role. And of course, with extremely organized sport, everything is quite prepared, planned before. So you have this role of referee, this role of athlete, this role of coach. But maybe we should look at it a bit differently. And I'm always interested in emerging sport, you know, extreme sport, for instance, where maybe at the time of the first competition in kite board, you had basically the athlete together on the beach, just deciding the rule before actually jumping in the water. So this kind of element also could be more in line with this, also this sort of a way to see sport as fun for the younger generation. So basically looking also in this aspect, which are sociological aspect, not only of course the data and the analytics, but also to this new way to look at things and how to better communicate.
Great, Claude. Yeah, I think they're all really good lessons there. Really good advice, and I think that people will be taking that on board. I'm delighted to see the comments that are coming in as you're speaking. I'm looking at the chat box as well, and I'm delighted we asked you to put into your chat box the 3 words that you felt summed up officials, and we've gotten some fantastic ones in there: educator, facilitator, balanced, fair, just, unbiased. A lot of great words: education, values, progress. It's great. Objectivity, respect, leadership, consistent, committed, caring, mental toughness, motivation. It's incredible actually when you start to think of listing some of the roles that referees may go onto the court or the pitch with. And it's great to see that. And a comment there from Don Blacklock around WADA changing their approach to educating athletes using a values-based approach. Perhaps sport too must take this approach for educating athletes on the role of sports officials around the values. And it's interesting to see some of the differences between some sports as well in there, and how some do that pretty well, I would say, and some maybe have got a bit to learn. Not many questions. We have good questions in there. Somebody was asking about how many people we've had on today, and we had 320 registered today. We had about 225, I think, we've had on, people taking part, and of course people can catch up afterwards. In terms of some of the questions that are coming in there, yeah, around lots of things that are going on in the world in refereeing at the moment, but interesting, not many questions about the one big thing, of course, that's been going on in the world this year, which has been COVID-19. I'm sorry that I've not managed to get to the end without mentioning that. I know you wanted an escape from that. We managed to do pretty well, but I'd be interested to ask our panel, you know, what particular challenges you think COVID-19 has brought for sport officials, perhaps this year. Does anybody want to come in on that? Who would like to?
I would quite like to come in on something that I feel is very important. It's not just the physical well-being of sports officials. I think it's the mental health and well-being that has been a real issue. You know, it's not just, it doesn't matter what your sport is, whether you have to be physically fit or not, psychologically you have to be fit. And that, I think, is the key issue that has been a problem for sports officials across many sports I've spoken to, because they've not had what we call game time. They can't be, you know, fit for the purpose just by, you know, turning on a tap or flicking a switch. I think their mental health being out of their sport for so long is quite a challenge. I know I'm starting to engage with sports psychologists now to prepare officials for when their sport reopens. So I think, as well as physical fitness, I think the mental health and well-being is tough.
Yeah, good, Jenny, good point. Patrick?
Yes, Jenny, you are more than totally right. Mental health is really one of the biggest problems, not only in the period of COVID, but in general, and now particularly because of the COVID-19. We have three categories, I can say, to simplify. We have three categories of referees, and we have three types of different problems. With the very young one, the one who they are at school and they want to be a referee in their school organization. Well, the majority of them have no sport or just a little, so they do not go in our world of refereeing. And these young people they will not learn how to be a referee, and they will not be a referee within 5 years or 6 years. So certainly in a 2 or 3 years, we will have some problems with a young one and with a new one. You have all the referees who are amateur, not professional. So now the sport is totally stopped, more or less. You have no competition. So these people, first of all, they lose money. Even if they are amateur, they make a very small amount of money. Sometimes for a young one, 18, 20, 22 years old, it's an important amount of money, even if it is 20 or 25 euro. So this money is lost, and it could be a problem. It could be also a problem for the referee of the other category, those who make, for example, 300 or 400 euro per match. They are not professional because they do not make a lot of money per year, but they do not have this money. This money is 3,000 per year, for example, which represent a lot of money today. I think that because they do not judge now, they are not working in the area, they do not improve their qualities, they do not train. Perhaps you do not know, David, but when you are a referee, you have to train every day, or more or less every day, very often. In any case, not only on the wording of the law of the play, but also on physically speaking. So it's important. You cannot train enough. You do not judge enough, so your level decrease. And I am particularly afraid for those who are not professional, particularly in the majority of the combat sport, for example. For the moment, the games will take place in 2021 in Tokyo, as you know. This referee has absolutely no training until now, and certainly not until 1 month, 2 months, 3 months more. So what will be the level of the global level of the referees in Tokyo? To be frank with you, I don't know. I am very happy to stop my career 20 years ago because if I am a referee and if I have to go to Tokyo, I will be really very, very afraid by my level, by my quality or defect. And the last category is a professional one. So as you know, as you see at the TV, football and other rugby and other sports are continuing their activity. So I hope that the referee are in a good shape and they have a good training. But they represent, on a worldwide basis, perhaps 2 or 3% of the total of the referee and judges in the world. So more or less, very, very few numbers, small numbers.
Yeah. Claude, do you have anything you'd like to finish with?
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't want to add too much to all what was said. Maybe just, sort of good sense. I mean, like in any other similar situation where we need this training and this physical training actually to be good in the performance of the thing. Athlete is the same. Taking this opportunity of having maybe more exchange of experience, forum, get together between referees so that they can take this time that they might not have the possibility to actually practice, to at least exchange together about their experience. It's easy now with all those e-conferencing possibilities, maybe finding some solution where you can still connect and continue to build the community without borders, actually, since it's not about traveling, etc. So that could be also something we could push now in this current situation. Otherwise, of course, it's difficult. I mean, we're not there with immersive technology, and enough materials to really recreate the simulation of taking decision for a referee. We will be there certainly in a few years. So at least it's a good, I would say, a good alert to start working on such things with engineering schools, video games producers, and so on, to have a possibility somehow to recreate a simulation where you can train also at least your brain in terms of decision making.
Yes, I think, Claude, I think that's a great point. I think that may be a good theme for a future IFSO workshop and webinar, is the technical side and the technology that's available now and the aids that we're seeing coming in. I think that's great. There's no doubt that we couldn't cover everything today. We haven't tried to cover everything in sports officiating today, but that's been really helpful. Janie, Claude and Patrick, that's been great to get your insight again and to some of these questions. I think that the feedback has been really positive on the chat box about what we've heard. So we're going to wrap it up there today. Thank you to the ONSIDE and IFSO teams for their terrific work. Thank you to all of our speakers, Ben Gittis, Julia Lee, Jeff Carroll, Jeannie Frampton, Patrick Vajda, Jan Vasblom, Charlotte Girard-Fabre, Claude Stricker, Rigio Sharda and Eric Santron. Please provide a virtual round of applause where you are for these people who've done a wonderful job today. And thank you also to James Barton, who's been our master producer, keeping the event running smoothly. He's done a great job, so thank you very much, James. The most important people, of course, are you, the participants. We said that at the start of the day. You're the people who make the difference to sports officiating around the world. So thank you for taking the time to join us today, and please share what you've heard with your colleagues. It's been an interesting day, interesting morning, fascinating presentations, and lots of ideas for future action collaboration. We've got the final poll up there because you're so good at filling in these polls. So we've got the final one there, just asking whether you feel the event has met your expectations. Obviously, there are lots of things that we could have brought in today that Ben and the team could have pulled together that we didn't, because we would have been here all day. But I think this is something that will grow and grow. And so we'd love to hear your ideas about what could be at the heart of future presentations. We'll be in touch after the event and follow up with you, but please keep these channels of communication open as we move forward. It's been a great morning, great to be part of. I've been David Ferguson from the Observatoire for Sport in Scotland, and you have been a wonderful virtual audience. Thank you and goodbye.